Food is an integral way of how we connect with other people. And food taboos dictate what we're allowed to eat and how those social interactions will go. Our food taboos tell us a lot about ourselves, about our beliefs, our culture, yet most of us have never questioned them. Some religions would even consider it blasphemous to do so. However, with our increasingly diverse culture and with globalization, it's important to understand our own cultural beliefs if we want to be more self-aware, and we need to minimize the offense and harm that we do to other cultures. And most importantly, we may want to be able to break or change taboos to have a positive impact on our health and on our environment. The first step is understanding what a food taboo even is. So, food taboos are more than a preference. A preference would be, I don't really like mushrooms, or I just don't do fish. And it's something personal. It doesn't have any major social repercussions. You're probably not going to get judged or shunned for it. And, it is going to maybe, if you break it, you could expand your experiences, but you won't necessarily get in trouble. There are, these are created based on personal experiences, or avoiding certain foods because of a health condition, or for environmental or ethical reasons, such as becoming vegan or vegetarian. Or there might be social pressures, such as teenagers in high school not wanting to take the healthy home-packed meal because it's embarrassing to eat differently from their peers. So there might be peer pressure that encourages us to eat a certain way in front of certain other people. But it's not a strict rule. Now, with taboos, this is a rigid cultural, religious, or legal rule about what is and is not acceptable. It dictates what we eat, how we eat, who we eat with, where and with whom. If I walk into a fancy restaurant and start eating with my American restaurant and start eating with my fingers, I am absolutely going to be spoken to and probably removed from the premises. But there are places throughout the world where that is completely a normal and acceptable way of eating, like in Southeast Asia. So if you break a taboo, there can be some very real social repercussions. And especially if it's religiously based, you could be shunned from your religious culture. If it's legally based, it could result in fines or prison time, such as animal cruelty laws. So if they're this complicated, why would we form them in the first place? Well, a lot of these actually make sense. A lot of taboos are based on really foundational, important information, such as protecting us from physical harm, right? If I live in a region that has a whole bunch of poisonous snakes, it would make sense for my group, for my culture, to make a rule that we just don't eat snakes, because it's just not a safe food source. Some of them give you a bellyache, but also you might die if you try to kill it and don't succeed and it bites you. So that is a really good reason to make a taboo against eating snakes. There's also, though, spiritual protection. So some people have a belief system that when we pass away, we might be reincarnated as an animal. If that's true, then the cow might be an ancestor of mine. And how rude if I were to eat them. And so we consider those people would consider all creatures sacred and would be concerned about offending or harming someone that is a loved one in a new form. So they might err on the side of vegetarianism, or at least avoid the sacred animals like a sacred cow. There's a tribe called the Orang Asli tribe in West Malaysia who believe that all the animals have spirits, and that when we kill and eat them, their spirit is in combat with our spirit. So if they are a large predatory or large, strong creature that had a strong spirit, and I am in ill health or am a vulnerable person like a child or an elderly person, my spirit might not be strong enough to handle their spirit. And so it would be wise for me as a weaker person to choose smaller animals with smaller spirits that are safer for my consumption. So they have rules made up around the spiritual value of food. A third example of this is some cultures have totem animals, protectors and guides and guardians, and it would be pretty offensive to eat your guardian. So if you are the bear clan, you don't eat bears. That's a taboo. There are also taboos that we've created intentionally, culturally, to make us fit in or to distribute resources or for ritualism or for legality. Just briefly, I want to point out that, there are challenges and benefits to following a taboo. Some of the challenges might be that, some of your food choices are limited, that it separates us from other groups. Even though it makes us feel as though we are connected with our group, it differentiates us from others and can make those connections more difficult. It can be kind of hard to sustain if we go traveling and all of the food options are our taboos. Things like that. However, there are benefits to eating, to following a taboo. It can have environmental impact, limiting the consumption of certain foods, protecting endangered species, or protecting animals that we consider very valuable or have emotional attachments to, like cats and dogs and horses. It creates that social cohesion. It can protect our health from bad things such as alcohol or poisons. When I think about American food taboos, though, I think of Fear Factor and their eating competitions, and where everyone's dared to eat bovine testicles and bird spit drinks and bugs and grubs and rats and things like the eyeballs and things like that. And it's just so interesting that these foods are TV worthy when they're so commonly accepted in some other cultures. Like, about 25% of the world eats insects on a daily basis, yet here in the West it's absolutely considered disgusting. So why is that? Well, there's reasons for protecting certain animals, for having some of these taboos. One that I mentioned earlier was protecting valued species, the ones that we have emotionally bonded with. So what makes a horse, a dog, and a cat different from a cow and a pig and a rabbit and any other animal? Why do we have these guys as protected and as a taboo against eating them? Well, interestingly, a lot of the animals that people have, like this, that people have a taboo against, it's because they're useful. They've been domesticated. They are companions. And we, especially in the West, what's interesting is that we have abundance of other food options, so we can afford to reserve this whole group of these different groups of animals and say, oh, just don't eat them, because we have a lot of other options. Some of the cultures where they still eat cats and dogs, this may be an integral food source for them, and that is a concern with globalization, is that we are westernizing everyone. Other countries are starting to want to follow our patterns, and some of the younger generations who have always eaten bugs or have always eaten cats and dogs or have always eaten certain foods that the West considers disgusting, they now, in their effort to emulate this popular Western ideal, are refusing to eat traditional foods. And is that protecting cats and dogs and bugs? Yes, but it also is separating them from their ethnic roots, and it's possibly endangering the welfare of future generations by removing them from a major food source that may be needed in their environment. Because, as I said earlier, cultures that eat insects on a daily basis, this may be an integral source of protein for them. They may not have a lot of other options. If the West makes it disgusting and unpopular for them to eat bugs and suddenly popularizes really unattainable food sources, it could really harm them. An interesting taboo that we just don't even think of really as a taboo and is rather recent, really since the 70s, is, forbidding alcohol consumption and trying to deter pregnant women from smoking tobacco when they're pregnant. It was actually really popular for doctors to prescribe alcohol in the 60s and even to use it as an IV to stop premature labor and help with pain and help reduce stress. And so they'd say, yeah, go home and have a drink or two. It wasn't until the 70s when we finally had enough research to really connect fetal alcohol syndrome with pregnant alcohol consumption that we finally created laws in order to ban and educate. Like, the laws are not banning women from drinking alcohol, but the laws with the FDA were about, let's label these containers and show everyone that it's dangerous so that we can create a taboo and create and get women to recognize that this is an unsafe practice. And so that is an example of a U.S. law changing the way that women interacted with a food source, or a substance, alcohol and cigarettes. And we've seen a lot of improvements. The cigarette laws were, started in the 60s even. So there is a shift, and it is possible, and laws definitely have an impact. The animal cruelty laws, which I believe were even more recent, maybe the 80s or 90s, making it illegal, not just frowned upon, to eat your cats and dogs. And I think it was about the same time that we finally closed down and banned horse slaughterhouses. So laws can definitely shift taboos. The origins of some of the American food taboos are interesting. A lot of it is, considering the U.S. is dominantly a European white culture at this time, the majority of the people that immigrated over here originally and founded the food culture of this continent, after, of course, the indigenous, because when they came here, did not recognize the indigenous as a valid intellectual source of food knowledge. They didn't see them as equals, and they brought over their own foods they felt would work for them, that they were accustomed to, that fit their taboos. And a lot of the European royalty would create whimsical, this queen is into this king has forbidden everyone to eat this. And so some of it was personal preferences of elitist people creating popularity around certain foods. But there also is a religious puritanism that says certain foods are unclean, and that's where we in the West get this fear of insects and rodents, and we think they're disgusting and dirty and that they need to be exterminated rather than eaten. There's also some changes that have been shifting around the morality of eating animals with the vegan and vegetarian movements. A lot of that started happening back in the 60s and has been gaining momentum. And there's also environmental concerns, which is where, yes, we're protecting animals, endangered animals. But there's also right now a growing concern about our growing population and about the negative emissions from cows and their manure, and looking for a more sustainable protein source to take care of this growing population without damaging the earth and without damaging the ozone. And so we're starting to become more and more curious about what we can do to feed our population with different food sources rather than the beef industry. Oh yeah, and we used to slaughter our own animals, and so we were accustomed to seeing the whole creature, and we're less queasy about heads and feet and guts and things like that. But as the industrialization of butchering came in, as everyone moved more into the cities and we industrialized all the food processes, we now can go to the store and only have a chicken thigh, boneless, skinless. We buy pork, not pigs. And so we've really moved away from being comfortable as Americans with seeing a face or a head or a foot or something that's really an animal identifying factor in our food. In addition to industrialization, we also have advances in science that have caused us to be able to understand how to cook pork to a safer temperature so that we aren't having to be concerned about the parasites that are in their meat. We have organic agriculture that is teaching us that not all insects are disgusting and evil. There are good ones. We have cultural mixing and globalization that is bringing foreign foods into the U.S. and opening our minds to different kinds of foods, including going to the Vietnamese restaurant and having a bowl of pho that has tripe, which is stomach, which is cow stomach. This is something that a traditional American never would have had after the industrialization, I suppose. So it can be really challenging to break taboos. We have social and biological disgust mechanisms that can be really difficult to overcome in trying something that we've been taught all and observed as being disgusting. We might have personal, ethical, moral beliefs around whether a food is gross or evil or unholy. There's also just this American identity that it's hard. This is how Americans eat, that people really get set rigid in this perspective. And so trying to eat different foods outside of that, that's going to be challenging. And there might be social repercussions. If people don't like the way that you are making these choices, you might be kicked out of a group for breaking those rules. However, there are a lot of benefits to breaking a taboo, which is why this is important. It gives us more food options, like I talked about with, our growing population. This makes like insects are very productive. They use fewer resources. They are more nutritious. So this is a cheaper, more sustainable food source that can feed a growing population. This is an amazing opportunity. We also have all this cultural blending. By being open to trying new foods, we're able to eat with different people, and it kind of broadens who we consider our in-group. It also makes us more aware of our westernization of other cultures, and it raises that awareness so that we can try to be careful about reinforcing the grossness of, like, how Americans think that these other cultures, ew, your food is gross. We don't want to do that to people in other countries. We want them to preserve their natural, their native diets as much as possible, for nutritious reasons, for health reasons, and for cultural reasons. Some research I saw was talking about how you would actually go about changing a food taboo. As I spoke earlier, clearly laws help with that, and social contracts help with that. But just imagine if I was trying to convince everyone to eat crickets as an amazing protein source. The first step is raising an awareness, spreading information, helping people to recognize, at least intellectually, that yes, this is a valid food source, and then reducing that gross factor, right? Like, no, they're actually clean. They're not disgusting. They are grown in a certain way, fed on a certain food substance. So they're high quality. They're cleaned and they're prepared a certain way. We can prepare it in a way that is more appealing. So I personally don't want to reach in a bag, pull a cricket legs and all, and eat it. That's going to hit the gross factor, because I've been raised thinking bugs are gross. However, they also can sell it powdered as a protein that you add in your muffins. Yay, yes, protein powder from a bug. So that is a more palatable option. And then, interestingly, college students, open-minded, want to try new ideas. And so they're a great target audience for starting a new food revolution. And you can get over that concern with being ostracized for being weird and different. If you can just get a couple people together that are willing to try it, then that you have peer acceptance and safety in numbers. And then once they start trying it, then they expand who that in-group is, and they expand who, they build momentum. And more people are willing to try it. So it's a great starting point. You can also create laws, like I said, and you can make it a moral issue, such as you're harming the earth, or it's animal cruelty. Certain terminology, certain framing can make or break a taboo movement. All right, finally, the whole reason we're talking about this. Why does this matter to us? Well, number one, so that we can be more aware of ourselves and be in control of our food choices, understand our own food choices, and through that, understand other people, and help to preserve other cultures. But most importantly, I think, is just being open to new ideas so that we can preserve our environment and feed our growing population and think outside the box. Thanks for listening. These are my references for the research. These are my references for the images.